yí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
So we are waiting a few more of the other panelists. We start in a moment. Let me just check up on our discussant to know if we would make it today. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we have to start for the sake of time. So welcome again to this third session in our panel on Boko Haram, narrating terrorism, which we began yesterday in the morning session, and in the evening session, we had very exciting discussions. And like we said yesterday, we just have to bear in mind and remember that the division of this panel into 3 sessions was very arbitrary. So we hope to be able to link up the conversation that has happened over the past 2 panels and bring all of them into like interaction. Hopefully the other panelists yesterday will also join us to have to bring them together. So the first panelist will probably not be here. So we are following the order we have it in the program. So Joanne, will be going first because you are next on the program. And we have 15 minutes to present, 12 minutes recommended, or 15 minutes. Since we are just 3 of us, I think we have a few time to go into that. Once 2 minutes to go, I will send you a private message. I will also raise this to show you that we have 2 minutes. And once it's time up, I will raise this as well to show you that time is up. And I will really play that we don't go beyond 15 minutes as much as possible. Normally, we have a discussant who gives feedback after the presentations before we take questions. I hope he makes it today. Otherwise, we see how to give each other feedback, as the case may be. So let's go ahead and introduce Joanne to begin the conversation. So Joanne's paper is titled Narratives of Dispossession and Identity Crisis, a comparative study of Joel Kachi Benson's Daughters of Chibok in Bakassi and Adobite Samubani's Beni the Baobab Tree. I think this project has changed a bit. It's up to you if the title has changed. Just let us know what your current title is. And Joanne Chidebere, who has a master's degree in English literature at the University of Lagos, Akoka, and received a bachelor's degree in English language and literature at Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Oka, Anambra State. She's interested in trauma, identity and cultural studies, Boko Haram terrorism, and virtual reality storytelling. So the floor is yours, Joanne. Thank you. Can you unmute?
Hi, good afternoon from here. Good day, everyone. I'm Joan Chidebere Iwuna, and I've been trying to share my screen, but obviously I'm having a bit of difficulty with that, so I would just proceed without that. So, as been said by Mr. Chijoke, my paper title is Narratives of Dispossession and Identity Crisis, in comparative study of Joel Kachi Benson's Daughters of Chibok and Adobe's Buried Beneath the Baobab Tree. So basically what my paper is trying to reflect on is the narratives of dispossession and identity crisis. And oftentimes when we talk about dispossession and identity crisis in literary studies is most often probe on, or most often probe on a collective traumatic experience. It often reflects the traumatic experiences of people or that have been dispossessed and have suffered identity crisis due to one traumatic experience or the other. So our focus here today is on the Boko Haram terrorism in Nigeria. And we are aware of how this insurgency has caused a lot of mayhem on the lives of people and properties in Nigeria. So that's my focus on today's presentation. So basically, what my paper is trying to project is that oftentimes when people talk about insurgency in Nigeria, it's often from a place of displacement. Nothing much have been said on dispossession. And my paper today will try to reflect on what it means to be dispossessed, or better still, on the concept of dispossession and how it has, impact on the self, that is identity or identities, as the case may be. So first of all, we'd have to go deep into what dispossession is all about. So generally, when you talk about dispossession, it often comes from a Marxist point of view, or to do with, like, let's say, land accumulation or politics for capitalism. But this is not what this paper is trying to project. This paper is trying to project dispossession having a double valence. And what do I mean by this? What I'm trying to say here is dispossession has more than just the surface meaning of being ejected from your homes or otherwise. Dispossession can also be as physical and as psychological. So we're looking at dispossession as from a psychological or psychoanalytical point of view. And I would say that from the way I understand what dispossession is, I am of the view that dispossession is more than just the physical deprivation. It's an extension of what displacement is, if you understand what I mean. What I mean by an extension of displacement is it goes beyond displacement. It's more than just the physical. It extends into the psychological. And then we also look at the external forms of dispossession and how it goes about to affect your sense of being, affect you psychologically, that it gets to affect your sense of being, and by extension, your sense of identity. So when we talk about narratives of dispossession and identity crisis, we find out that it's often recurring when it comes to the subject of, the Boko Haram terrorism in Nigeria. And if you're being honest, we find out that the Boko Haram terrorism in Nigeria have been told in very media. So now my topic, my thesis is actually both form and content based, because I looked at how these narratives of dispossession and identity crisis can actually influence the way a form, can actually influence the form in which it is being told. But today I'll focus more on the content of dispossession and identity crisis. So if you're looking at dispossession from the content base, you'll find out that when we talk about the narrative of dispossession and identity crisis in Nigeria, literally we're saying that it has often revolved around the Boko Haram insurgency. And then we want to view dispossession as a psychosocial political construct. And what I mean by psychosocial political construct is that dispossession is often caused by either social, political, or psychological realities. It does not just occur in a vacuum. For you to be dispossessed, it doesn't just occur in a vacuum. And I know that a lot of critics have talked about dispossession in terms of being dispossessed and then becoming dispossessed. And now my focus here today is on becoming dispossessed. Now, a lot of critics have also argued that naturally, as human beings, we are already dispossessed beings, because we are not independent of ourselves. We need to depend on one another for us to perform well in the society. But that's not the focus for today. Our focus for today is on becoming dispossessed. What do we mean by saying that someone has become dispossessed of their sense of self, of their language, of their means of livelihood, of who they are and where they're from? And these are the issues that most of these Boko Haram victims have faced, over the last 8 years since the insurgency has started. And when I mean 8 years, I'm not saying since Boko Haram studies have started. I mean since the Chibok girls experience, because that's where I'll be focusing on. The two works I'm using, Daughters of Chibok, and then Adobe's work reflected on the Chibok girls kidnapping that happened on April 14th of 2014. And since then, we have had victims, we've had survivors, we've had people who still haven't found their loved ones today. And when we go through it, we see how they have been dispossessed of not just their means of livelihood, of not just their homes, but also of the sense of self and of who they are. Because now these people now live in the shadows of their past. They don't really know who they are. And this has affected their sense of identity in one way or the other. So yes, that is basically what my project is trying to project, because we're trying to say that it is just more than displacement. It's just more than being displaced. It has gone a step further, and that's for us to really and truly redefine the concept of dispossession as not just being about land accumulation, or the politics of capitalism. That it is beyond that, and it also has to do with psychology and psychoanalysis. So dispossession in itself, as a word, is very analytic in nature, and it stems from the fact that it is beyond the physical deprivation this time. It has gone psychological, and then it has also affected one's, and can also affect one's sense of identity or who they are as a person. Let's take, for instance, the character of Biata in Adobe's Buried Beneath Baobab Tree, the major character. When she was being kidnapped from her home, we saw the different stages to which this dispossession happened, and then we get to experience that dispossession has different languages. And what do I mean by this? Languages of being dispossessed can be enslavement. Languages of being dispossessed can be alienation. Languages of being dispossessed can also be self-dispossession in itself. And I would read out a quote from the novel that says, "How would the mother of a child with bad blood lift her head high among normal human beings? Life in the forest might have been better for me." Now, this particular quote, it's very, very meaningful for me. I'm very, very sure to most of you that have read this novel, because it explains in just a very little way what it truly means to be dispossessed of oneself. Your sense of self, your sense of dignity, your sense of who you are in a community. Because I've been opportuned, to actually be in a close space with one of the girls that has been, rescued from the Boko Haram terrorism. I mean, one of the Chibok girls, and I got to listen firsthand, about her experiences, going into the forest, and then as a single person, just about writing WAEC, and then coming out, with two kids, and she's having the doubt of, would my people, would my family accept me back, just as it was, in the earlier days? Would they accept my children, or would they term them as bad blood, or the Boko Haram children, and would stigmatize me? So most of these people have actually faced that self-doubt, and they are being turned with who they were before, and then who they are now, and they're struggling to get a meaning of how their life is now. So this sense of being dispossessed, has even gone beyond them, being taken physically out of their homes in Chibok. It has proceeded to being psychological, and then affecting the sense of who they are, because they're having doubts of, who am I really? Most of them don't know who they are. Most of them have struggled with acceptance, have struggled with stigmatization, have struggled with the feeling of alienation. They're neither here nor there. They have struggled with a sense of loss and pain. And this has been the traumatic experience of the dispossessed, people of the dispossessed people. Of the dispossessed people. So yes, dispossession is more than just being physical, and it does not just occur in a vacuum. It has affected a lot of people or the victims, if I would say, in a different, lot of ways, that transcended even into the psychological and then affected who they are as people. I would also want to use Joel Benson's Daughters of Chibok as an example, and I will use a quote in the documentary by the major character Yana, and Yana said here that in the beginning it seems like everyone cared, but now the whole world has moved on, and we are still here waiting. Now this is coming from a place of deep pain and loss. Yana Galang, who is the mother of one of the kidnapped Chibok girls and whose daughter has not been returned to her. It's been like 8 years and she hasn't seen her daughter, and she has heard a lot of stories about what has been happening to these girls, and she doesn't know the fate of her daughter. And she's trying to say that when it all happened, a lot of people, there were hashtags, bring back our girls. A lot of people were into it. A lot of people were trying to raise awareness so that the government could be able to do something about the release of these girls. But now it's been 8 years since that time, and people have actually moved on. People have moved on to other issues, and they're still here waiting. They're still here living in denial. Some of them have died as a result of the pain and the anguish. Some of them are living in denial. Some of them are still hoping for something that might never happen. And that's the case of Yana Galang in this situation. She has been dispossessed of her sense of self, because it feels like when she lost her daughter to the Boko Haram, it feels like a part of her has also been lost as well, and she hasn't fully recovered. So now dispossession does not also occur to just the people who have been victims, but also of the family members. It's an extensive kind of feeling. Yana Galang was not physically dispossessed of her home or a sense of self, but then psychologically that's affected her, and then of who she is, because she has been seeing other women, see their daughters, and then she's wondering why hers is different, and every of that. So basically, my paper in general is just trying to reflect on the extent to which dispossession has affected one's sense of, identity. And then it has also shown that it doesn't occur in a vacuum, that dispossession and identity crisis is as a result of the proliferating mayhem that the Boko Haram terrorism has caused, over the years. And then it's trying to say that dispossession is beyond just is beyond looking at it from a Marxist approach, and that it is also more of a psychoanalytical thing, and that it is it's a traumatic experience that usually goes with identity crisis and can affect, one's sense of identity, alongside. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So next we are going to Dr. James. His talk is titled Documentary Analysis of Boko Haram Terrorism, the Case of Nigeria Watch Database. And Dr. James Okolie Osemene is currently a senior lecturer in the Department of International Relations at the College of Science and Management Sciences, Social and Management Sciences, West Spring University, Nigeria. He's the current director of the Office of Research, Linkages and International Collaboration, the chairman of Mobile Examination Misconduct Committee, and the chairman of the newly constituted University Ranking Committee. He received his doctorate and master's degree in Peace and Conflict Studies from University of Ibadan, and bachelor's degree in History and International Studies from Imo State University. He's alumnus of the Pan-African Doctoral Academy, alumnus of Mayasa Postdoctoral School 2022, both at the University of Ghana, and research fellow at the French Institute for Research in Africa. Dr. Koleo Semen is also a member of many research working groups within and South Africa, including Nationalism in the Transnational Age, Norway, and the Conflict Research Network West Africa, etc. His main research interests are, among others, global security, insurgency and counterinsurgency, terrorism, open and regional insecurity and crime, Pan-Africanism, cross-border research, peace building, and how state actors and traditional institutions engage with non-state armed groups. His research work counts more than 50 publications, local and international peer-reviewed scholarly journals, book chapters, and books themselves. Doc, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Doc. I appreciate. Thank you for inviting me to present my paper in this panel. Well, I'm Dr. James Okoyo Semen. Let me try to share my screen. Sorry, I want to share my screen.
Is it not working?
Hey, it will work. I want to.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if the screen is showing there. Sorry. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. The title of my presentation is Documentary Analysis of Boko Haram Terrorism in the Case of Nigeria Project. Well, the essence of the paper is to offer insight into the activities of the Boko Haram terrorist group, which uses violence to achieve its goals. And this will be done through the Nigeria Watch Project. Nigeria Watch Project is a database that addresses the incidents of violent activities across the country. And most times these activities involve both non-state actors and state actors, including security forces. And over the years, we've seen the evolution of Boko Haram, which has witnessed different developments since the escalation of the terrorism, with different interests. And it has also portrayed the sect in different perspectives. But not everybody actually understands what the terrorism of this group is all about. And for instance, the international community sees the Boko Haram differently, while some people within and outside Nigeria, like African countries, also see it in a different way. But the question is, what is Nigeria Watch Project saying about the Boko Haram state through the documents that are available on the database? And the issue is that with different media reports, it's even a bit complicated now understanding what the Boko Haram terrorism is all about. People just see it as, a radical group or extremist group. But the issue is that the study will be relying on the Nigeria Watch Project to present the findings. The study has 3 research questions. The first is, why does Boko Haram need documentary analysis? And the second is, how does Nigeria Watch describe the activities of Boko Haram? Also, the third question is, what are the takeaway lessons from the documents produced by Boko Haram through the Nigeria Watch Project? Well, the first issue to address is that the Boko Haram terrorism requires documentary analysis, mainly because not everybody understands Boko Haram through Boko Haram. That is, people hear different things, like through the media. In fact, there are different media sources online, social media, and even print media. But the issue is that what is the terrorist group saying about its activities? And that is one of the reasons, because looking at the Boko Haram, most people in the north see it differently, while some people in the south and even other parts of West Africa and Southern Africa see the insurgent or terrorist group differently. But the Boko Haram sect, through Nigeria World Database, has been able to produce a lot of messages. And these messages are messages of information and reorientation. That is, they aim at informing the people, giving them proper information on what they stand for. And like they always say, the group is not all about Western education is forbidden. But through Nigeria World Project, it has been found that the messages of Boko Haram are targeted at gaining not just global attention, but giving the global or the international community the right information from their own perspective. Because every terrorist group has an ideology. And in fact, Boko Haram, I must say here right now, is that I must say now that Boko Haram is not just a terrorist group. Boko Haram is an insurgent terrorist organization. Why? Why is it so? It's an insurgent group that aims at having its own territory within a state, that's within a parent state, which is Nigerian state. And this Nigerian state does not want to tolerate anything in form of de facto statehood, just like the IPOB issue in Igbo land. And the Boko Haram insurgency has escalated over the years through the use of terrorist tactics. So it's not just a terrorist organization. It is a terrorist organization that uses both violence and other means like religion to achieve its goal. And we all know how Boko Haram members use their religion to push for more members and recruit more people that are interested in joining the group. And the international community has also been alarmed through these activities, and that led to the designation of the terrorist group as an international terrorist organization in the USA. Now, armed robbers, for example, Boko Haram has also engaged in the use of different tactics, engaging in different tactics, kidnapping and armed robbery, assassination. Boko Haram is an insurgent group that has not only used bank robberies, assassination, and other means to gain arms from barracks and other security agencies. It has extended to publish a lot of leaflets, as well as video evidence to show that the group is highly serious to target any member of communities or any security agency that gives out information against the group. So the insurgent group is using all channels, both video document, leaflets, to publicize within communities and across the continent. So whoever cares to listen, that the group is not ready to compromise its principles. Of course, it works with an ideology. And since the group is interested in territory, documents that are available on Nigeria Watch Project have also revealed that these videos and leaflets published in Hausa and Arabic have been translated to English, and they go as far as raising alarm at communities to ensure that youths and elders do not partner with security agencies to target the group. And they have not stopped cautioning or warning individuals who go against their principles. And Boko Haram leaders use their channels to score themselves high. That is one of the findings of this paper, that most of these video and leaflets they use those documents to score themselves high during confrontation with security forces. And they also use such channels to ridicule security agencies that are not able to contain the Boko Haram at communities. And we all know the significance of ungoverned spaces in this regard. Of course, that is one of the sources of security governance failure in the Northeast and the Lake Chad area. That because over the years, we've seen how security agencies struggle to contain the Boko Haram. And we've also heard about the superiority of firepower to the extent that it has been alleged on several platforms that the Boko Haram has seemed to have more strategies more than the military. And it remains to be seen how an organized state will be struggling to contain an insurgent group that only controls few areas within the country. Again, the study found that the way Boko Haram presents its activity to the public is highly significant in this campaign. And that is why we see situations where the public, everybody, most people are eager to hear from this insurgent group whenever they make their broadcast or they release a new video. For instance, this warning, there's a warning, that the group aims at discrediting the authority of the government and the inability of security forces to enforce law and order. For instance, from one of the documents, the Boko Haram released a leaflet in 2015 from the Nigeria World Project, and the document says, to all Muslims and lovers of Islam, stay away from all polling booths if she wants to live long, because we are going to launch multiple attacks on the polling booths. Anyone who desires peace should keep himself from cooperating with security agents against us and should not fight us, because we only engage against those that war against us. We have not attacked you because you have not attacked us. So looking at this statement, the fact there is that the Boko Haram sect does not want to tolerate any individual in community that cooperates or collaborates with security agencies. And the group targets such individuals with violence. And the violence normally ends in death. And that is the punishment according to the documents on the Nigeria World Project. And such death does not end at one level, like community level. Such deaths, when they are planned and executed, are extended to even various security organizations like prisons and the barracks. These insurgents also have not stopped calling out security forces for being too coercive on the Boko Haram members. And this has remained one of their concerns as a stepped-up campaign for holy war against the government. Documents available on Nigeria World Project show that Boko Haram targets government officials and individuals and aim at destabilizing the peace in the country. And their goal is, when they create this disorder, that they will be able to take advantage of the instability and weakness of security governance to gain more advantage within the territories they control. And since we've seen how the problem of bomb blasts reduced, but that does not mean the activities of Boko Haram have also ended. Of course, there are some efforts that have been made by security agencies like the Multinational Joint Task Force and other special operation forces within the Northeast. But the issue is that since some of these group members have been involved in what we call a factionalization, because factionalization has not been helpful to Boko Haram sect. Of course, this is one of the problems that the group has suffered, because they have been able to be subdued to an extent by the government through decapitation, like the death of some of their leaders over the years has also led to the factionalization of the group and the disorder that the group experienced, especially in form of infighting. So the issue of Boko Haram not being able to tolerate some of the community members that give out information about them to security agencies also goes to tell that such a group, when they eventually gain more territory within the Northeast, of course, they are going to be autocratic, considering the principles or ideology. And that is where community members have been able to initiate some level of resilience in coping with this kind of situation. Because one, it's not easy for people to leave their homes and abandon their communities and relocate to other regions in the country. The question is, how many people will be able to do this? So the Nigeria Watch Project goes a long way to reveal the true identity and activities of Boko Haram terrorists. And of course, as I conclude, one thing that the work has found is that the way Boko Haram is framed by the media is not something that Boko Haram is happy about. Because through the Nigeria World Project, the Boko Haram cell has also warned a lot of media organizations to be mindful of how they give reports to the government and also describe them on social media or other platforms. And this is a very, very critical issue when analyzing the activities of Boko Haram, because we also know about wrong perceptions. If somebody does not understand how a violent non-state group operates, of course, such a media outlet needs to find out or engage in investigative journalism to give her the right information, because how people understand the Boko Haram or how media friends with Boko Haram will also go a long way to addressing this insurgent violence across the country. And it is hoped that from the Nigeria World Project, there are more people who do not understand Hausa or Arabic will be able to understand what the Boko Haram stands for. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you so much for that exciting presentation. So we go over to the final one, which is actually mine. So my paper is titled "Bring Back Our Guests." I should bring back our guests. Literary memory, activism, and remediation of Boko Haram terrorism. And Chijoke Ona is currently a PhD student in the Literature and English department at Cornell University, where he specializes in African literature, Black Atlantic studies, legal criticism, and memory studies. His ongoing research focuses on the emergence of I should bring back our guests as global activism that bears witness to Boko Haram terrorism across the world. For his dissertation, he hopes to explore the biopolitics of toxic waste and disposability in Africa and its diaspora. Okay, so the floor is mine. And my internet has been bad, so if I notice that it's not going well, if anyone can just point me to, I will just turn off my video as I'm reading my presentation. So once more, the title of my paper is Bring Back Our Guests, I should bring back our guests, literary brackets, memory activism, and the remediation of Boko Haram terrorism. As a way of introduction, in this paper, I trace the transnational activist movements that emerged in the aftermath of the Chibok girls kidnapping, showing how the BBOG emerged as the trendiest global activist campaign of 2014 and 2015. The claim of this paper is that the emergence of the Bring Back Our Guests community that bear witness to Boko Haram to a global media event. The paper is invested in the interplay between global media technologies that effectively transform the BBOG movements into a transnational memory community that bears witness to Boko Haram terrorism and agitates for the release of the kidnapped schoolgirls from captivity. Analyzing the global media scapes of BBOG activism, I argue that the centrality of Chibok girls kidnapping as a site of memory Boko Haram terrorism is intricately linked to the heavy mediation and mediation of the event by writers, activists, and journalists all over the world. I showed that testimonial narratives played critical roles in the wake of the Chibok girls kidnapping, first functioning as a counter-narrative to the colonialism of the Nigerian government, who dismissed the Chibok girls kidnapping as a political hoax, and secondly, as a rallying cry to activists all over the world to galvanize support for the movement. This underscores the affordances of literary text as agent of social and political activism. Test the concept of literary activism as a rubric through which to examine the activist potentials of literary text. The watershed moment in the history of Boko Haram terrorism is the night of April 14, 2014, when 276 girls who were attending schools in the village of Chibok were kidnapped. Though just one of the many acts of terror unleashed by Boko Haram terrorists whose reign of terror dates back to 2009, the outrage was swift. Few hours after the event, activists in Nigeria cried out against Boko Haram terrorists and the slow and indifferent handling of the insurgency by the Goodluck Jonathan's administration. Their demand was simple: bring back our girls. The campaign soon spread throughout the world as the news of the kidnapping of the girls was received as a global tragedy beyond what Nigeria alone could or should handle. Protesters gathered around the world, including Abuja, Vancouver, London, and Los Angeles, to mention just a few, demanding the immediate release of the girls. This will globalize the campaign more, turning it into a well-mediated digital activism, garnering over 3.3 million tweets in less than a month. And as she bring back our girls would become, for a time, Twitter's most tweeted hashtag, reaching out to 16. BBOG therefore became a transnational social movement, thanks primarily to the affordances of the new media technologies. The Chibok girls kidnapping therefore became a heavily mediatized event, and its global outreach is due to this fact. However, though I have understood the Chibok girls kidnapping as a global transmedia event, it must be said that new media technologies were not the only cultural medium used by activists to advance their cause. In just a few years after this incident, the Chibok girls kidnapping has been intensely mediated and remediated, making it a series of representation in multiple literary and creative genres, as different examples in the previous sessions of this panel has shown. So I won't go into mentioning all the text and all the music and films that has grown out of this event. So I've gone over that in the last two panels. With such transmedia and plurimedia mediation and remediation, there's urgent need to situate these multifarious creative responses within the BBOG movement. That is one debate I'm making. So all these texts should be read alongside the Bring Back Our Girls movement. My argument is that the emergence of the Chibok girls kidnapping as a global site of remembering Boko Haram terrorism is interconnected with the intermediate dynamics that turn Chibok girls kidnapping into a high-profile site of memory, intensely mediated and vigorously circulated across media platforms, cultures, and places. The multimedia representation of Chibok girls kidnapping, presented here together with the global BBOG movement, helps to stabilize, consolidate, and disseminate the memories of the Chibok girls kidnapping across the world. So, of my paper, I turn to the testimonial Mobani, global activism that the BBOG inaugurated, transnational memory making projects of the BBOG witnessing community, and how it frames its engagement with the social movement. Since we are concerned with the media dynamics that are played into the movement vis-a-vis the transnational activism led by BBOG, I am not particularly interested in closely reading the testimonies in this novel. Rather, I'm interested in how the text and its author position themselves in relation to the movement, how it figures itself as a testimony, bear Beneath the Baobab Tree is a young adult novel as fiction. As I'm so sorry for that. My worst fear happened. I will just turn off the video and hopefully things will normalize. So sorry for that. Let me take that paragraph again. Buried Beneath the Baobab Tree is a young adult novel by Nigerian writer Adobe Tracy Amubani. Though this text categorizes itself as a novel, the writer herself has emphasized repeatedly that the text is sad of Boko Haram captivity. Almost all of those I have interviewed told me of one family or another, or a friend who died, usually in childbirth, from bites, illness, or during Nigerian military airstrikes on Boko Haram camps. Buried Beneath the Baobab Tree is journalism masquerading as film. My attempt go beyond the news headlines and present as many of these women as guest stories to the world. Boko Haram may have changed their lives forever and stolen their innocence and dreams, but terrorists have not succeeded in silencing their voices. She achieved this task of giving a voice to all the women and girls who never lived to tell their stories in the character of Yata, which actually means my daughter, is unnamed, but unfortunately called by her parents. And others in the last panels, Dr. Jibola has mentioned how this is a way of, reaching out to all the girls and women who have been kidnapped by Boko Haram. So Yata is a young, ambitious, and extremely talented teenage girl whose dreams are beyond the boundaries of Nigeria and is obsessed with education. She succeeds in becoming the first girl from her community to win the Bono State government scholarship for 10 girls to sponsor her education to university. This bright prospect was cut short by Boko Haram, who invaded the village, killed her and brothers, and abducted her into the forest, where she was married to a man who masked his face every time, even when asleep. One can see clearly that there's a kind of politics beyond this test, but it is primarily invested in giving a voice, on giving voices to the survivors of the insurgency and raising global solidarity to their plight. It is also consciously building a literary monument to the brutality of Boko Haram insurgency and hopes that this will be the first process of bringing justice to survivors. Hoffman, in another text on Boko Haram called A Gift from Darkness, claims that if it is written down, it is fixed, it won't go away. It's part of bringing justice text, becomes what Enrique has called languages and cultures, thus making it a powerful agent of cultural memory, information, and witness. Mubani justifies her claim that her text is journalism as written as fiction by noting that all the events in her text happened. In her interview with Susan Rhodes, Mubani said, I usually say that my novel is journalism as written as fiction. I tried as much as possible to only include things I have heard already, since that actually happened. The text position as a novel, based on the fictive process of the novel, becomes complicated, but its position as a work of testimony is thus for granted. And this is where my discussion comes in connection with Dr. survivors and explore the process of memory that the novel is consciously performing. Taken together, Mwobani and Mazis is a powerful piece of testimonial and memorial that uses the power of fictional narrative to bring disparate histories, memories, and cultures together. In the last session now. But beside the role of the intermediate phenomena, ensure the repeated remediation of the Chibok girls kidnapping across media scales, thus globalizing the memory of Chibok girls kidnapping. One must acknowledge that the potentiality of the Chibok girls event to conjure up disparate memories of injustices and atrocities across cultures was instrumental to the vociferous reception of the story across the world. The ability of the Chibok girls case to elicit memories of similar histories of mass disappearance and abduction, sexual slavery, child soldiering, not to say anything of other recent histories of terrorism since 9/11, is instrumental to its global reception. The cross-cultural and transhistorical references that accompanies process of remembrance is what Michael Robert has conceived as cultural memories multidirectionality, and this phenomenon is at work in the Bring Back Our Girls global activism. The fact that the Chibok girls kidnapping happened at the backdrop of a Western popular consciousness related to the effects of terrorism following 9/11 and the contentious war on terror that is devastating some parts of Asia and Middle East makes it easier for American and Western audiences to stand in solidarity with the girls and families devastated by Boko Haram's reign of terror. Besides, Boko Haram, which means Western education is forbidden, is itself an affront of Western norms and values in the first place. This underscores the imperative for the emerging literature, testimonies, and artistic revelation to be read in the context of the Bring Back Our Girls movement, but even more so in context of the subgenre called War on Terror literature that blossomed post 9/11. A mass abduction of schoolgirls by anyone or group, not to say terrorist group, has a powerful mnemonic currency as capable of galvanizing the world as such events elicit many ugly histories across the world. For example, the international outcry against Boko Haram was framed within the global histories of forced marriage, sexual violence, and the weaponization of women by both state and non-state actors in violent situations. It is not surprising then that an American popular imagination, reckoning with its own history of sexual violence brought to the fore by the Me Too movement, would immediately rally around the effort to rescue the Chibok girls. Again, the kidnapping happened the same year that Malala Yousafzai won the Nobel Peace Prize for her struggle with the Taliban terrorist group due to her advocacy for female education. I must say that this also was the year that some schoolboys in Mexico were kidnapped for similar issue of attending school. That many, including Malala herself, identifies her experiences with that of the Chibok girls now for attempting to acquire Western education, showcase shared histories and experience, in turn, galvanize memory communities in solidarity with the cause of the BBOG. Historicizing memory cultures as I'm doing here allows us to recognize and appreciate memorial relations, shared histories, as well as shared visions of justice. The creative responses to Boko Haram terrorism exploit these shared histories, linking the Chibok girls kidnapping in particular and Boko Haram terrorism in general to other histories of violence and oppression, using a multidirectional, transnational, and transhistorical paradigm. Mwobani, for example, situates a narrative within the Western cultural memory of stolen children when she invokes Robert Browning's The Pied Piper of Hamelin as the epigraph of her novel. And we should also remember, like I said yesterday, that the Chibok girls kidnapping is reminiscent of the Boko girls kidnapping that happened in late 1990s in Uganda. Titilope Sonuga's poetry collection, This Is How We Disappear, links the kidnapping of the Chibok girls to global histories of mass abduction and disappearance, focusing especially on the African diasporic communities. The Sabatis music video around the world follows similar pattern as using the BBOG platform to resist global histories of abduction, enslavement, and human trafficking that affects women and girls disproportionately. The Chibok girls kidnapping ability to adapt, recontextualize, and appropriate to speak to different histories afforded the potentiality of a global memory event. Its ability to travel across space, time, histories, and memory cultures its capacity to stimulate and integrate intersecting histories across cultures endowed it with the mnemonic cloud to evolve at the site of remembering Boko Haram terrorism across the world. In conclusion, my argument is that if the question, why did this event become the central memory event of contemporary Nigeria, the answer is that it is due to the intermediate dynamics, which we can see, not just in how different media came together to project this event, but how the event itself is able to conjure these various memories around the world. This is how it's able to make meaning to people of the world who all came out to pressure for the release of the Chibok girls in the campaign as she bring back our girls. Thank you. So now we go into questions, and I'm asking the audience if anyone has a question for us. Now is the time to bring it in. I'm looking at the attendees. I think I have seen Dr. Jibola, for example, who was in the other panel. So I invite you, Doc, to come in whenever you want for us to wrap it up. This is the final time, so we want to wrap up all the discussion as much as possible. But for now, this is the time for questions. Okay, so while waiting for the audience, I think I have a question for Joanne. And in your presentation, for example, on dispossession, so what wasn't clear for me was what does dispossession actually mean and how does it work? Because you gave a very capacious view of the effects of dispossession. You said it's beyond physical, is also psychological, taking psychoanalytic bent, and it's even sometimes like beyond the person to include the families. And the question for me, in that kind of capacious nature of understanding dispossession, it just became akin to suffering, became akin to pain, became akin to even to trauma, to use some of the language that come up in this panel. So what exactly does dispossession mean and do differently for you? How does it work within this case of Boko Haram? And we can,
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. Like I said, earlier in my presentation, I said that when we talk about the concepts of dispossession and identity crisis in literary studies, it's often put into a collective traumatic experience. Okay, so when often we hear the word dispossession, it's often about traumatic trauma or experiences that aren't like all that smiley and all of that. So yes, dispossession in the general sense, oftentimes people, or let's say discourses on dispossession has always been about land accumulation. It has always been about the politics of capitalism. When you Google the word dispossession, most times they'll say when you have been dispossessed of your land and all of that. So I'm trying to, what my research is trying to do is trying to probe deeper into what the concept of dispossession actually means when it comes to trauma studies. Because most times these victims have been displaced of their homes, these victims displaced of their territories and all of that. So what I'm trying to project, or what I'm trying to argue with my paper, is that it's more than just displacement. It has gone beyond displacement. It's more of dispossession. And what do I really mean by dispossession? If you're looking at critics like Judith Butler, what they have said about dispossession, they said, dispossession has a double valence. Okay, it can come off as one, being dispossessed, and then it can come up as becoming dispossessed. Now, being dispossessed means that as human beings, naturally, we're already dispossessed because we are interrelational beings. We depend on one another to be able to survive. It probes on how self-sufficient one can be. And I don't think anyone can be really self-sufficient. So we are already dispossessed, as human beings naturally. But becoming dispossessed, that's where the political and social construct comes in the sense that becoming dispossessed is as a result of political or psychosocial factors. That is when becoming dispossessed happens. And becoming dispossessed now comes with, the whole concept of pain and loss, suffering, and then trauma. So yes, dispossession itself is actually analytical, if I can put that, and that it's beyond just the Marxist approach. It's gone beyond the Marxist approach of capitalism and land acquisition and all of that. It's now transcends into psychological, how one can be dispossessed their sense of self, how one can be dispossessed of of their body, in fact, just like we have seen in the works that I've used, for instance, in Adobe's Buried Beneath Baobab Tree, we see some of these victims being dispossessed of their sense of self, they don't even have control of their very own bodies, as seen in the main character Yata, and that the only way they can even have some sense of control is when they become, in quotes, wives of Boko Haram. That way they can have, that sense of freedom. So yes, dispossession is an extension of displacement, if I would say.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question for you in the chat, so you can look at it. But I saw Dr. Jibola's hand up. So before Doc comes in, I just wanted to say that unfortunately, we were not here yesterday, but the way you are reading dispossession, it seems to actually share a lot with how Dr. Jibola read yesterday using the same text, Ubani's text, about what she called a trauma continuum, which, in the sense of like the everyday trauma or the post-colony that actually affects victims of Boko Haram kidnapping. But the challenge with your reading of dispossession for me, going back to what yesterday as well, is that it seems to deny the same woman we are studying of education means for taking away from you, and it means you don't have it. So when you read it as their sense of self, even their sense of self have been taken away from them. When if you go back to the panels yesterday, we actually see that it's these women, many of them were actually in charge of at least walking through survivor in the camp. It just goes to like this whole difficulty with Spivak idea of can the subaltern speak? Well, the question is that immediately, on the one hand, we want to give the subaltern the agency that they are downtrodden and all of that. On the other hand, by doing that already, you are already robbing them of that agency in the first place. So just a kind of problematic, but let me defer to Dr. Jibola to perhaps help us out.
Yes, that's a very interesting perspective. So I think I would, look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, Doc, are you still there? Can you go ahead? Don't know if they can hear me. This in the chat. Oh, sorry, we can't hear you. Is it LSA, this how it's planned? Can we hear from the audience, or is it only from the panel? Let's know where the issue is coming from. Okay, thank you. So go ahead, please. You are now finalist, but you are muted.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now? Good
Yes.
afternoon. It's been a beautiful, beautiful time. I love the presentations and then the engagement so far. I'll just give comments and questions as I have them, my perspective though. For the first paper by Joanne, I love the way you are pointing our attention, away from displacement to dispossession. I just was going to ask you what someone already asked, if you have a theoretical underpinning of dispossession. I feel that a theoretical underpinning will help to delineate your frames of dispossession better, okay, and then we can better engage your debates. For the other paper using, helping us to listen to Boko Haram from Boko Haram, I felt that was a beautiful one. And then it reminded me of what Stephen Sloan said, where he said that research on terrorist activities, terrorism, and the effects of terror always, always present a complex hegemonic discourse. There is usually that we versus them, insider versus outsider, self and the other dichotomy, where we see the Boko Haram or the terrorist who is a foe to many, but he's still a friend to others. He's a savior to some people, a martyr, in fact, and even a saint. So I love the fact that you're foregrounding the character of terrorists as one that is very complex. There are several fluid representations of who a terrorist is and then what that terrorist is after. And I feel that if we're able to listen more to the Boko Haram men, we may just be able to decipher more solutions to this complex problem that is almost overtaking the country. For the paper by Professor Anna, I was going to slow myself down, to go over it again because it covered so much in so little a time. And, we're talking about the post-colonial trauma theorists yesterday. And I just wanted Katikaro to come and sit down and listen to you and then see the need for decolonizing trauma studies, trauma theory. Because I said, this is a beautiful display of this cross-cultural engagement, among histories of violence. Okay, the way you brought several stories of victimhood together. I just said this is a clear case for a decolonized trauma theory. Okay, I was going to ask you this, as you presented, I just said, so what then is the role of literature? You brought in literature, the other media through which the whole story of Bring Back Our Girls spread. And then as you made your presentation, I just kept thinking, so what then is the role of literature? How effective is literature in calling for political action? There will be more and more text on Bring Back Our Girls. And I've just been wondering, okay, so what work does literature do in all of this? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for becoming our discussant for today. Thanks for saving us from that. I don't know if, Joanne, are you ready to go first? Or let's start with Dr. James first. Joanne seems to have had enough for now. So let's start with Dr. James and then I will go and Joanne will come back. Doc, are you there?
Yes. Yes, Prof, I'm here. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. What did you say?
Do you have any response for Dr. Jibola's comments?
Okay, well, no, I don't have much to say. I just noted some of her points she made on the presentation. That is all the presentations we made. So that's what I have to say. That our observations are up.
Yeah, before I go over to mine, I think you were there, Doc, yesterday when Joshua presented on the discourse of terrorism. For example, how the discourse is called. I think I saw you in the attendee. Do you remember that? Do you remember that paper on how Boko Haram is constructed across three? I think he used 4 different Nigerian newspaper. But the part of what he ended up saying yesterday, or showing yesterday, is how even our understanding of terrorism, Boko Haram, is framed by the kind of media that we are consuming. So I just wanted to ask, because you end up showing us like how, or even like recommending, maybe by listening to understanding these people themselves, we can actually see how complex the issue is. I just wanted to ask, do you look at them as a fair representation of as just like kind of depository or Boko Haram thinking, or do you see them as engaging in what Joshua calls the discourse, or how they are constructing even our understanding of these texts? For example, when the texts come out in Arabic and they are translated into English, back into English, do you think that the kind of ideological frame of the newspaper themselves, I don't know what, I think you call it Watch Nigeria, does it have any role, any way it interferes with the message we receive? Or do you see them as authentic quotation, depository of the Boko Haram ideologies? So I don't know if you make any sense of that. We come back to you after we have gone around. So for my own question that you asked me, Doc, thank you so much for the feedback. And I will just confess first and foremost that I have a more cultural studies background. I have a combined honors degree in English and history from UNN. That has influenced how I look at my scholarship. The struggle I have had everywhere I have studied, including at these stages. My advisor will always tell me, I see your politics, I see your history, but I don't see your literature yet. Where is your literature? Because I'm in English department at the end of the day. So, and you saw that weakness, obviously in my work. However, the absence of literature in this case is actually somehow intentional on my part, because at the end of the day, the claim of my paper is that we cannot answer the question why the Chibok has become this central event that has, galvanized attention second only to the Civil War, by just saying that the media was doing this, by just saying that it was activists by Western powers. We saw all this thing on the panel yesterday. And I'm saying that it's actually a complex interplay between media. That was why I did not go into close reading, because it's not a question of what one novel is doing. If I should do close reading, that's why at the last session where I want to show, and that is where my paper is currently at revision, I want to show how the novels we have been reading, the Baobab 3, for example, I show one example, is connecting this history with many other histories. So that is one place I want to work on at the end of the paper. But you are correct, this 8,000 words paper condensed into 2,000 words. So I left out a lot, and you picked out like how I moved in from different spaces. Having said that, what does literature do in the context of like the role of literature in all of this? I actually pointed out towards that in my presentation as well. So literature from memory studies perspective becomes what Enrique calls portable monuments. So in this case, when the event began, even though it began on social media, it actually also followed, literature also came in very handy in promoting it. I'm taking literature very broadly speaking here. For example, one of the texts that we have is a Stolen Guest by Bauer, so who is a German journalist. So when the Chibok guest were kidnapped, he came into the northeast of Nigeria. He interviewed the early survivors of the attack, and he was publishing it in the German newspaper every day, as well as interviewing them. And some of them we published in Desert, the German newspaper that he was publishing in. Eventually, they were collected into this book, down called Stolen, which you featured yesterday in your presentation as well. So what does this mean? What does this mean actually? What it means is that for me, literature has become what I said, and really calls portable monument because of its ability to move. So each time that book is moving, the book was first written in German, and then it was now translated into English, which is even when we started reading it. The same thing happened with Gifts from Darkness, which we also showed yesterday, right? First written in German, and then moved over English and published in the UK before we even read it, before we even started reading it. And let's not forget that Patience in the Gift of Darkness doesn't even speak English. So we are reading that story in multiple translations. So what my claim, my stake is that literature is that medium that is able to like move these stories and these histories beyond cultures, beyond societies, beyond location. So literature like Mubani's text, you see the epigraph where he linked it to the histories of dispossession. Unlike the story you see on the social media, where social media will just say 200 girls have disappeared. Muban is able to link up these events, even when saying that same thing, to show how grounded this event is. Beyond that, Mubani's text was received in the US, received in Australia, received across the Anglophone world, and now translated into other languages. Why? In that moment, each time that book is moving in Enrique's understanding of memory studies, what is moving is the understanding of the event. Memory is being transmitted. It's crossing boundaries. Like I argued in the last session, it's also being localized within the social context in the way that it happened. For example, when the story reached Uganda, Ugandan parents that their children were kidnapped during their Boko kidnapping events, they wrote back to the Chiboge's parents in Nigeria to say, this is what we experienced more than 20 years ago, and this was how we went through it. So literature for me still plays a role because it is that, like we even argued today in your own panel, it's that text, it's that genre that's able to make this issue complex. If BBOG, which Adobe herself called in an interview a mistake for how it gave one view of Boko Haram terrorism, Berry the Baba 3 was able to step up to it and actually give us a very complex view of understanding of the events. So those are the two ways I see the role of literature. Number one, portable monument, it travels, it's mobile. As I brought it from the US to Nigeria and now to Ghana, it is moving. People are seeing it. People are saying, oh, what is this about? What is going on? In that way, the memory is moving and circulating. On the other hand, because of the way the fictive nature of literary text, it's able to connect memories and events together. And that is the only genre, at least for now, within the Boko Haram incident that are able to do that. Not film, not the social media, and also not other genres. Music has able to do that as well. But I gave some other examples of how that moves. So that is my struggling of how I think the literature is coming up to play its role within political movements. So Joanne, over to you.
Oh yes, like I said at the very beginning, just to answer the doctor's question, about if there's any theoretical underpinnings. Like I said, at the beginning of my presentation, but when you're talking about dispossession and identity crisis, as concepts, it does not just, occur in a vacuum. Something must have, happened for it to occur. And if you have the presumption that dispossession, has to do with you being deprived of something that rightfully belongs to you, then that means that there will be implications, So what I'm looking at is, like I said, dispossession in itself is very psychoanalytical. So, psychoanalysis and perhaps, trauma theories can help us understand, dispossession as a concept, because if, we're looking at the implications of dispossession on, on the actions of people, in this case, the characters and all of that, what happens after they have been dispossessed of themselves, what are the subsequent actions, then we have to study their psyche. We have to understand the workings of their mind, how they have been able to process this whole new trauma, and has it affected the way they behave, has it affected how they view life, has it affected even their sense of how they of the sense of identity or identities, as the case may be. So yes, it has a lot of psychoanalytical backings and perhaps trauma theories as well. Thank you.
So just to step in a bit, Joanne. So again, this is a conference geared towards all of us early careers and young grad students, bringing ideas together. So what Doc said before is you may not even have an answer to it. So the hope of the feedback is for us to go back and reform the papers. Is that the way you understand this position is wide and it's very widespread. That you might want to take a perspective. Like you just, even in your last statement now, you said maybe it's linked to psychoanalysis and trauma as well. But it's you that have to choose one part. And by choosing that one part to streamline of dispossession and then show it, you are telling us now that you can do this and do that. But that didn't come up in the presentation because you spread it. It seemed very like a kind of potentiality. What can happen and not. This paper is to be reworked. In a psychoanalytical project, you have to decide and then streamline your work within that so that you can have a very rich theoretical backing. It won't be everywhere. So that was my reading of it. Is there any other question for us? Okay, so if there is no question, we'll be closing early. Thank you so much for joining us in these past 3 panels. It's been very exciting, especially for yesterday and then continuing today. I wish the other panelists were here for us to like tidy it up together, but they are not here, so we're not going to do that. But I hope this has been fruitful, and thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a nice evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.